Hi there and welcome. My name is Belinda Doveston, and I'm going to take you through three separate webinars focusing on specific high performance board tools that are literally critical to your life as a director. They're like oxygen, and I'm going to talk to you about what these tools are really about and give you a little bit of a landscape of some of the things that should be in your toolkit, in your tool belt, to allow you to maximize your contribution in the boardroom and to drive a high performance board. In this particular session, I'm going to focus on tools related to engagement, relationships, and formation of boards and entities and relationships between. So on that note, I'd like to start with this quote that will come through in every single one of these, focusing on board tools. If you only have a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And so there are many board tools that are available to you and boards should use, yet really accessing and understanding a set of required methodologies or approaches or processes is really difficult to find. You know, there's typical things that you know about, like strategy. Well, that's quite vague. What does that really mean? Yet there are some really specific tools that are paramount to a high performance board. And so today I'm going to talk through some of the engagement tools that can put other things in your belt, not just hammers. Okay, so first up, I'd like to just talk about the three hats for a moment and how each of these three hats gets their authority. So shareholders invest capital in return for an expected return. It's not a return that they must get, because of course you can't take funds out of a company and put the company through or at risk of solvency liquidity issues. So it's an investment with an expectation of return. Now, the particular rules and requirements and duties of shareholders and directors and prescribed officers is defined in a company's memorandum of incorporation. And one of the second documents linked to that is what we call the shareholders agreement. Now, in particular, in South African Companies Act requirements is that the memorandum of incorporation of the entity of the company is literally the beginning and the end of everything. So shareholders may have requirements in their shareholders agreement which governs how shareholders interact with each other, and those agreements, that shareholder agreement or the terms thereof, cannot supersede or conflict with the memorandum of incorporation of the entity or the person, juristic person, known as the company. One of the things that happens through the memorandum of incorporation is that the shareholders appoint the board. One of the things that they can do is decide which directors get appointed to the board. They approve board appointments according to the requirements in the memorandum of incorporation. Now, in South African company law, in the Companies Act, the fact that the Companies Act covers such a diversity of size of entity from small business to large means that built into the Act is this ability for a company to have quite a wide decision-making authority for directors. Directors can have a big decision-making matrix, much more than you would typically have in a listed company. And so companies that are where all the shareholders, also the directors, and sometimes also the managers, you don't need to have such a delineation, and therefore, the board really, the directors have a lot of power. So we have this ability for shareholders to appoint the board, and the rights and responsibilities of all parties is defined in that memorandum of incorporation. It's the founding document of the company itself. So through that agreement, through the rules and requirements of how the directors are chosen, which shareholders can appoint directors, etc., we then have a board that's formed, and once a year in the annual general meeting, shareholders have opportunity to change that up. The board itself is now given a mandate, and it is held accountable to this MOI, yet the board has the opportunity to delegate authority that it has been vested in it through the shareholders, to delegate that authority to management, to operational teams, through what we know as a delegation of authority policies. That says these are the kinds of decisions, Mr. and Mrs. Management, you may make on your own. These are the kinds of decisions you need to ask for our approval or our input or to notify us. And then through that delegation of authority, management gets a particular scope of what it can go forth and do on its own. And then through that, management therefore implements operational policy to take the board policy and translate that into operational policy. Now, what's really important is that this word policy can strike fear into the hearts of even the strongest soul. And when we talk about policy, we're talking about statements of principle, guiding principles that allow clarity of rules and regulations without all the dogma of detailed policies in the dusty policy file, which we'll cover as we go through these 3 webinars. So suffice to say that the board delegates its authority, or some of its authority, or limitations, through the delegation of authority through to management, and management then takes that through operational policy. So the purpose of this diagram is just to create a little bit of a visual reference of the flow of policy, starting with the memorandum of incorporation through to the delegation of authority and operational policy, of how this delegation of responsibility flows from shareholders down through to management. So as I mentioned, the memorandum of incorporation, the opportunity of this particular tool, sets out the rights, duties, and directives of shareholders, directors, and prescribed officers, and other types, other people like, for example, members of board committees, for example. The challenge is that very often memorandums of incorporation are put in place by lawyers and the shareholder and directors just kind of sign that document and paperwork and don't really look at the detail. Sometimes it happens, and so we can have generic MOIs that don't really capture or reflect the real authority and a good, well thought out process around decision making. So it is a challenge and something that business founders need to get to grips with, and it's worthwhile reviewing the MOI from time to time to make sure it's still relevant. And of course, related to that, it's not really actively used or well understood. It's not really understood as this founding document that's absolutely critical of setting the rules of engagement across the entire organization, particularly between shareholders, directors, and prescribed officers. So the MOI, something that every company should have easy access to, should understand, and perhaps if it's a bit generic, start thinking about what are some of the things that we could do to really ring fence and make sure decision-making protocol and rights and responsibilities and duties are correctly allocated in that most important document. The next type of engagement tool in your toolkit is the board charter and terms of reference. The board charter is a policy approved and determined by the board itself. The terms of reference is a policy that the board approves, and what the terms of reference does, it states the clear mandate of any board committees that are established. We will go into board committees briefly in a later webinar. Yet just know that it's a similar kind of idea, understanding, what is a quorum for a committee and a board, same for both. What is the purpose? What's the scope of that committee? What kind of decisions can they make? How often do they meet, and what are their reporting responsibilities? So the opportunity of these 2 policies is to set very clear terms of engagement, have a very crystal clear defined mandate, so that both directors and committee members know exactly what they're expected to deliver, just like you would do a detailed performance agreement with a team member, and can therefore be held accountable for ensuring that they do indeed deliver that. And in particular, the board charter allows the board to agree what its board values are and how it expects board members to behave. What is the standard requirement of what this particular board is all about and what is acceptable? The challenge, of course, is that once these particular policies are in place and these terms of references have been signed off, very often it's like they don't exist. So no one references them, everyone forgets the detail, and as a result you often have no accountability or systems in place to monitor them. If you're lucky, like an annual policy review, you'll look at them once a year, if that. They're not necessarily documents that become living things that guide the decision making and the discussions of the board as a whole. And particularly if we think about board behavior and board culture and values, how important a board charter is in helping us uncover that. The next tool is the delegation of authority policy, and you have a little clip of an example of one of our templates. And the delegation of authority really is a powerful tool of clearly defining risk control and empowering management. What that means is that a board that trusts that management will deliver on its word, so remember it's a big but, a board that trusts that will want to give management more authority. Because why would a board want to have every decision come across its desk if the management actually is competent, has demonstrated a history of delivering on its promises? If the management team can do that, the board is going to want to support management by giving that management team or the managing director more authority and more scope to just get on with business. Where there is a managing director who maybe makes lots of promises and doesn't deliver, or doesn't consider risk, or doesn't perform, or perhaps delivers reports on late, a board's going to be a bit reluctant to now hand more authority over. They're probably going to want to take some away. So the board has this ability of reflecting on this delegation of authority and making decisions to change that based on how comfortable they are that decisions that are being made are therefore honoring these terms. So there's really a wonderful opportunity to use delegation of authority to release the chains, and a new board would typically have quite tight reins, or a new set of directors would like tight reins around the management team until such time as they've established a little bit of a rapport and understanding around what this team is really capable of, and then over time start releasing some of those and putting power back into management's hands. Of course, with any policy, the implementation and accountability aspects of a delegation of authority are extremely challenging. And it is one of those things that disappears into a file and never sees the light of day. So like with any policy, the absolutely critical element is what are the ways that we can integrate the policy statements or the specific delegations and integrate those into business processes and actually make them a living thing rather than a piece of paper we have to refer to make a decision, that we can embed those decisions into our very processes themselves. That's quite an ambitious undertaking and quite a maturity of a business model to be able to implement that. But particularly around the finance aspect where there's controls around who can decide what money is spent for what, really critical that controls are put in place. Yet you'll typically find that implementation and holding the team accountable is really tough. And technically, if you look at what should be in your position descriptions as a managing director, if you consciously are in breach and unconsciously, because you should know, the delegation of authority, that's actually a disciplinary process. That's warning letter stuff. It's hearings. So this is the importance that if a board has given a mandate to the managing director and the management team to delegate its authority to the management team, and the management team then don't deliver or break that contract, what is the board going to do? What they should do is performance manage the chief executive or managing director. So that's just a brief overview of some of the key tools that are used for engagement. We spoke about the memorandum of incorporation, the board charter, the terms of reference for a board committee, delegation of authority, and later we'll talk a little bit more about policy as a very powerful tool that is not about the dusty file, but is indeed around creating powerful decision-making frameworks within the organization and supporting the board to fulfill its fiduciary duty to the company itself. I trust that you enjoyed that and have gleaned some insight into the engagement tools that are possible, and that your next company board meeting, you're going to ask questions around the MOI, the board charter, delegation of authority, and how do we know for a fact the DOA is being adhered to and there's accountability around what if management is indeed not following the policy that the board has given it.